Good morning. I'm Allison Gregory from Oregon Health and Science University, and I've been given about 10 minutes to tell you about our PLAN Ready Natural History Study, including both what it is and why it's important. So I'm hopeful that most of you already attended or joined in with the natural history talk earlier this week. So I'm not going to launch into a bunch of definitions other than to say that natural history studies are important because they lay the foundation for clinical trials in our mind. And what I mean by that is in a clinical trial, you usually have a small set of outcome measures that you measure on each person to see if your intervention is making a difference. And picking that small group of outcome measures is very important. If you pick the wrong ones, that can be problematic. It could lead to a trial failing when really the intervention was effective. So we want to have very solid natural history data to support any future clinical trials in PLAN. Our study itself includes subjects or people with both the infantile and juvenile forms of PLAN. At this point, we don't have the adult dystonia Parkinsonism group included because they're quite different, and trying to be consistent with sets of questions and things would be hard. There may be opportunity for that in the future. So at this point, there's sort of two branches to the study. The one that's highlighted here is the one that's more relevant for families and guardians. And then the other participant is a healthcare provider, which I'll explain in a little bit of detail. As far as parents and guardians go, everything is done online, and we hope that makes it easier for you. It means that you have a window of time every 3 to 6 months to answer a set of questions online, and you can do that at midnight when everybody's asleep if that's best. You can do it in the morning, you can do it in parts. We're just hopeful that you'll be able to get it done. We ask about developmental milestones. So you're familiar with those things related to motor skills, social development, speech and language. And then we also ask about what we call disease milestones that are specific to PLAN, and I'll explain those in a minute. And then for each group, we also have a patient-reported outcome measure, which is a standardized published measure. I'm sure you've taken these in the past. Something like an intelligence test would be one of those, or a Vineland scale, but they're standardized and they're normed, so we can use them to compare between groups and within groups more reliably. There is also a role for a healthcare provider in answering some more detailed questions for us, and then we also try to get medical records from an earlier point in time for each participant, so we have sort of an entry point maybe before the onset of their first symptoms. So a little more detail about what we ask families to do. It's serial data collection, so it's done in real time, and every 3 months for kids 5 and under, or every 6 months for children 6+, we ask you to do an update. We also have designed a way for families of deceased children to participate, and some people have felt really strongly that they wanted to do that. So if that's of interest to you, you can let me know, but that does involve just a single entry online. We collect it in real time to capture both the attainment and the loss of developmental skills that I described previously, and then also what we call disease milestones. So these are things based on our expertise for years with PLAN. We've also pulled them from other what are called common data elements in the literature. And then we got input from other experts, and we also piloted them with a small number of PLAN families. But these milestones are things that we think are key in the development and progression of PLAN. So it'd be something like getting a G-tube, ordering the first wheelchair, having an eye exam that showed optic atrophy for the first time. I think you all can imagine, and those of you in the study have seen what we think some of those key things are. So we also ask parents and guardians to complete what's called a patient-reported outcome measure. In this case, it's really a parent-reported outcome. They do it by proxy. And these are selected, as I said, things that are relevant to PLAN, that are standardized, and that allows us to score them reliably. So for any one child, we can look over time at how their score changes. We can look in aggregate at people with INAD or juvenile PLAN and compare, or we can compare it to a control group of people who don't have PLAN. So this is an example, a screenshot of what it actually looks like on our website. We have a portal, we send you a link, it's secure, it's on an OHSU server using a platform called RedCap. So when you go in, you see this set of probably about 25 yes or no questions, and there are just 3 of them here. And you just click yes or no. So we've tried to make it user friendly, we've tried to make it pretty easy. And I can imagine that for somebody who does this every 3 months, it probably does get a little old. It's important to us. And what you can imagine is, sometimes for several, what we call virtual visits, we'll see sort of the same answers coming through, but then something will convert. There'll be a new milestone, something will change. And what we really want to capture is exactly when that happened and how old your child was, so we can start comparing and collecting data for the group. This is an example of what one of the parent reported outcome measures looks like on our platform. And this is the infant and toddler quality of life questionnaire. So it's for the little kids with INAD. And you can see, along the left side, there are things that are relevant to this population, things like how they're sleeping, how they're feeding, whether they're rolling over, sitting up, playing. And the question is, how much are they limited by their disease? Is it a lot? Is it not very much? Or is the question not even applicable at this point in time? And again, I think it's probably a pretty quick thing for parents and guardians to scroll through and complete for us. So we do also ask for healthcare providers to get involved. This can be a neurologist, a geneticist, a developmental pediatrician, but most often it's a physical or an occupational therapist, because they're the ones seeing the kids regularly and sort of familiar with their skills and their challenges with motor skills and fine motor, that sort of thing. So a lot of the questions that we ask them do overlap with what we ask parents, but they're also expanded. So things that are a little more granular and a little more technical, like discerning between dystonia and spasticity and rigidity, or hypotonia, things that we wouldn't feel comfortable asking parents about, even though most of you could answer those just fine. We want to get that from the physical therapists. And we do ask families to help drive this process by introducing me, and signing off on a release so that I can work with them directly to get some of that information on a set schedule. Statistical analysis. So we're in our 4th year of this study. We have a lot of data. I'm going to give you an update in a minute on how many people are enrolled and where we're at. But I did want to spend a minute on statistical analysis because it's important for the success of using the data and publishing it and being able to leverage it for that foundation for a trial that I mentioned. So we're using sort of a progressive model. It's called structural equation modeling. I think I've mentioned it to this group before. It's a way to model disease progression. And what it lets us do is examine different rates and patterns of disease progression at both a group level and an individual level. So we can take all those milestones and all those developmental and disease changes that I've told you about, try to determine which ones might be most important, and also look at which ones we have the most consistent and largest data set for. And then the statisticians literally build a model for PLAN, and it, at an individual level, I think of it like a growth curve. When you go to your pediatrician's office, you see that paper, or maybe it's on the computer screen now, with the blue curve and for height and weight. Usually a child stays on their curve. If they're 25th percentile, they usually chug right along and stay on that line. So this is like building a model like that for PLAN. And similarly, a child would progress through PLAN sort of on their line. However, if we had an intervention, when the gene therapy trial moves into humans, that's a potential time when they could hop off that line if the intervention is working. So that's sort of a simplistic way to think about the statistical modeling that we have a contracted group doing for us, because we don't do that ourselves. And we've also learned from an interim analysis that in order to have the best power for this type of study and modeling, we ideally would have about 40 or more subjects enrolled with INAD. And, Ideally, that would be the same for juvenile because we'd like to keep those two groups separate. That's a really tall order for the atypical juvenile cases because they're even more rare. So we do have backup plans in that case where, if we don't get 40, okay, well, here's what we do if we only have 30. There's a slightly different way to do this type of modeling. But for the best power, we'd like to have 40 plus. So here's our current status. Right now, overall, we have 41 subjects enrolled. 29 of those have the infantile form, so 29 have INAD. So to get to that, goal of 40, we need about 11 more in the next year, which is a bit of a tall order. We have 12 juvenile cases, and then it's a coincidence that down below here, the 29 and the 12 happened again. I just wanted to tell you about our breakdown. So we have, of the 41, 29 total from the US, the UK, Australia, or Canada. I point those out because their medical records are in English and their physical therapists speak and write and use English in their records, which makes it a lot easier just from the standpoint of logistics of participation. So those people are all fully engaged and their therapists are generally engaged as well. Some of you, I should mention, are no longer doing physical or occupational therapy for a variety of reasons, and that's okay. In that case, we just let that part drop off from what we collect. And then we do have 12 participants from other countries that are not primarily English speaking, where their medical records might be in a different language, their therapists speak other languages. In that case, if the parents themselves are fluent, that's okay. That's all we really need to get the basics done, and they keep doing those 3 to 6 months visits for us. The next 3 slides are very pretty, and I have Katrina and Puneet to thank for that. They just pulled a little more of the demographics for us to look at. So ethnic breakdown, maybe not surprisingly, this is a predominantly Caucasian group, but we do have other ethnicities represented, and 7% of our kids and adults are Hispanic or Latino. We have 11 different countries represented. And we have people from 16 different states, including our wonderful state of Oregon, which is actually pretty rare for NBIA. So just a few more things I wanted to touch on that are related to this study. One is in 2020, so last year, I think we started pre-COVID, but wrapped this up pretty early in the pandemic. We contributed a pretty big data set to Dr. Manju Kurian's group, who we collaborate with frequently and openly back and forth. The data is de-identified, so any of you who are in the study, that means we scrubbed any identifier like a name or date of birth off, and we just gave it to Dr. Kurian with a coded number, so she can't link it back to any names, which is important whenever we share data. But this was to support her preparation to move into humans with gene therapy trial that she's been working on in mice. And in this case, the study she designed was retrospective, meaning they have a questionnaire and it looks back in time for people with INAD. When did this happen? When did that happen? So we were able to contribute, I think, about 20 cases to that. In addition, her funding agency, as well as the equivalent to the FDA in her country, have stressed the importance of a prospective study with any kind of move into human gene therapy trials. And that's what we bring to the table as well with this PLAN Ready. It's prospective, meaning we're capturing things in real time, marching along through 5 years, which is considered to be more reliable and more consistent than trying to glean it from medical records or look back. So both of our teams are anticipating that this is going to be an essential resource, both for her trial that'll be coming up hopefully in the next several years, and future other trials and collaborations. And then finally, I just wanted to briefly mention tissue banking. This is not specific to PLAN Ready. This is sort of a more general part of our program, but there are parts relevant to you that I wanted to just mention. So we have a partnership with the Oregon Brain Bank. This is a longstanding partnership. And we've collected both frozen and fixed brain tissue from tens of people with NBIA now, but 5 with PLAN, including 2 in pretty recent years. And that's pretty significant. It's a difficult decision for families. I think it's often a very fulfilling decision. They feel strongly about it. I hope that more people will consider it and that people will talk about it openly if you've been involved in that. But these brain tissue samples are truly priceless to us and to other investigators. There are certain questions that you can only answer with that type of tissue. And it is something that we take very good care of because we know how important it is, but we are willing to share to another investigator who has a really compelling study or something that they're trying to do. And then we have cell lines as well. So you may have been involved in this yourselves at past, not virtual, but in-person NBIA International Family Meetings. We tend to collect both blood and skin samples when we can, and we can take those cells and treat them in a certain way where we can freeze them and then bring them back. Years from now, we can bring the cells, grow them back up and use them. So these are just a wonderful resource to have in the freezer. That way, if you have a new research question that comes up in a few years, if a collaborator, if another investigator needs them, we share them openly and freely. And I think there's opportunity there for us to build up more cell lines, especially the fibroblast lines, which are useful. And hopefully at the next meeting, which will be in person, we can meet with you all and perhaps collect some more of those. So that's it for the formal part of my talk. I believe I'll be available live for questions after this concludes. And I want to thank everybody at OHSU on my team, as well as INAD Cure for supporting specifically this study for the last several years. Thank you.